so hopefully you've had a few minutes to try some of these problems. If you forgot and you didn't practice these problems, pause this video now and work out these problems and then start it back up so that you can check to see if you've got it right or wrong. All right, so let's do A. So it says perform the following calculations to the correct number of significant figures. So I want you to do the math, tell me the correct math answer, but to the right number of significant figures. So how many decimal places are you going to round to? So let's look at this one. 1.10 times 0.5120 times 4.0015 divided by 3.45555. So it's all multiplication and division. So what was our multiplication and division rule? So that rule was that you go by the least number of sig figs. So if it's sig figs, that means I need to count my sig figs. So 1.10, the ones count because they're non-zero. This 0 is a trailing 0, but it's after the decimal, which means it counts. So this guy has 3 sig figs. All right, let's do the next one. The 5, 1, and 2 count because they're non-zero. This 0 is a leading 0. So remember, leading zeros don't count. This is a trailing 0, but it's after the decimal place, so it counts. So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, next one. The 4, the 1, and the 5 count because they're non-zeros. These zeros are interior because if I go to the left or if I go to the right, I hit a number, a non-zero. So that means they count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All of them are non-zero, so they all count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so trying to figure out what is going to be my final answer. So I need to take this whole thing and put it in the calculator. So when you put that entire thing in the calculator, this is the number that you will get in your calculator. But that's not my final answer, because my final answer has to be based on sig figs. Our least number of sig figs here was 3. So this should be just 3 sig figs. So that's how I rounded. I rounded to 3. The 0 is a leading 0, so that means it doesn't count. That counts. That counts. That counts. So we stop. It's a 1, so we round down. So our number is just 0.652. We can only have 3 significant figures. All right, so let's look at B. So B has got this number plus this number minus this number. So it's just addition and subtraction. And it's written kind of the old school, back in the day way that they would teach you addition and subtraction. You probably aren't used to seeing it like that, but it'll be easier. Okay? So addition and subtraction is what rule? Fewest number of decimal places. Okay, so if you notice, it's all aligned on the decimal here. So how many decimal places here? 1, 2, 3. How many here? 1. And here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So your answer should go to the least number of decimal places, which is 1. But before we do that, we put the whole thing in our calculator, and we put the whole thing in our calculator, we get 4.853. Whole thing. Then we say, well, it's only supposed to be to 1 decimal place. So here's my 1 decimal place. This is a 5, which means I round up. So this is going to be 4.9. There's 1 decimal place. This is a 5, so it's going to round me up to 4.9. All right, let's do C. So this number times 3.99870 divided by, I got this bad boy in parentheses with a subtraction. So I've got multiplication and division and subtraction together. So which one do I do first? So remember our PEMDAS. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my parentheses. So in my parentheses, I want to first do the math here. Okay, since I know that it's going to be multiple things, I kind of want to do the math as I go instead of doing it a little bit differently here where I could just kind of do it together. All right, so let's do the math. The 40, these two numbers, the 452 minus, and that gives me 0.3455. Right at the whole calculator answer. All right, we're doing subtraction, so subtraction is the least number of decimal places. This is 4 decimal places. This is 2. The fewest number is what I go by. So I don't round this, I just write my little underline. So it's significant to the second decimal place. Okay? So don't say 0.355 and then use that number over here in your math, because you've rounded too early and you're going to be wrong. Write out the whole thing, use the whole number in your math, but just know only these 2 numbers are significant. All right, so now we can do the rest of our math. We could do this number times this number divided by this whole number. Okay, so let's do our math. This times this divided by that whole number, and that gives me 52.7990. That'd be my whole math answer. Now I need to know what my final answer is based on significant figures. So if it's multiplication and division, it's sig figs. So we have to see how many here. They're all non-zero, so that means they all count, so that's 4 sig figs. These are all non-zero, so they all count. This is a trailing 0, but there is a decimal place, so it means it also counts. So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, remember we ignore the 55, the 2 5s here, because we're only looking at these numbers for significance. So the 3 and the 4 count because they're non-zero. This is a leading 0, so it doesn't count. So this is only significant to 2 sig figs. So fewest number of sig figs, this is 4, this is 6, this is 2. So there, I've got 5 counts and the 2 counts. So that's where it stops. 7 means I round up, so I get 53. All right, last one. 14 times my 0.55 minus my 8. So I've got multiplication and subtraction. So I have to use my order of operations. I do my parentheses first. My parentheses, I do this math. So it's this times this. I do the math. And my number comes out to be 8.162. Now I want to know, do all these numbers count? So we're doing multiplication. So multiplication goes by significant figures. Okay? Let me erase this so I can write on top this time. So 14.84, they're all non-zero, so they all count. So this is 4 sig figs. The 5s count. This is a leading 0. Leading 0s don't count, so this is 2 sig figs. So based on sig figs, my final answer, well, not my final answer, sorry, this answer should only go to two significant figures. So the 8 and the 1. I don't round up to 8.2 when I do my math. I just put a little line under here, so I know that's kind of where my sig figs stop. All right, so now I want to do the subtraction. So 8.162 minus 8.02. Do the whole thing. And that gives you 0.142. Now let's look at where do I round this up to. So subtraction. Subtraction is your decimal places. This tells me that I only could go to the first decimal place here. So that's 1 decimal place. That's 2 decimal places. So 1 is the lower number. So that means this is only going to be 1 decimal place. This is a 4, so I round down to just 0.1. All right, so that is it for sig figs. So if you were able to do C and D, you were good to go. You've got the rules down pat, and you can apply them when we're trying to do our calculations in chemistry and figure out what our final answer should be rounded to. All right, so on the next session, our next lecture session, we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about energy. So it's the last little kind of section before we dive into our math, and it kind of is a little bit different. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff we talked about when we introduced temperature.